The views and opinions of this broadcast do not reflect the views and opinions of Armed Media, New Productions and its affiliates. Enjoy the show.
The official podcast for single women over 35. Who I am Candace Harper, lovecoach.com, coming to you live from the V Club. Woo! And tonight I got Jamie and Courtney from the V Club with me. You guys know I teach and inspire audacious intimacy to powerful, professional, grown women who want real relationships from seductive singlehoods. And more importantly, I help single city women over 35 who have given up on love discover their passions and purpose and stop getting ghosted. And like I said, we're coming from the V Club. It's one of my favorite places to be. It's a gorgeous venue in the heart of Chelsea where women take classes, workshops, and attend events around sex and relationships. And you can check out the by going to thevclub.com. Also, men are going to be coming soon too, right? Like, yes. We're working on classes for men. I have a class that's coming up that invites men. I see Angela has just joined us on the Facebook. Now, those of you who are out in the listening audience, you might be listening on your smart device through the TuneIn app, listening to Armed Radio, or maybe you're in the garden on armedradioglobal.com. We're also now available on iHeartRadio, so if you have an Alexa, you can ask for Candy. We're also replays on Spreaker and Spotify. And those of you joining live on Facebook, or if you're on Facebook at all, come and join our group, the Creative Love Collective and Armed Radio Global Group News. Now, if you're listening and you want to call in and you want to join in the conversation, you can call 1-800-508-5431 or comment live here on Facebook. Hi, Joseph Brown just joined. People are going to be trickling in. We're going to have a very juicy conversation tonight. Now, the other thing is, if you're an introvert and you have something to say or a question you want to ask, you can also email askforcandypodcast@gmail.com. So like I said, I'm Candace Harper, Love Coach. My talent is conversation. My passion is personal growth. My purpose is to teach and inspire radical self-acceptance in myself and others so that we can all have our best possible love life. That's what we want, right? And what this show is about, if you haven't been here before, each week we have lively conversations about different topics relating to love and relationships. Sometimes we bring on special guests or play games and activities. Always we get a chance to laugh, cry, or just learn something new. And that is why this is a conversation. We're not here to hand down a bunch of dating or relationship rules or rights and wrongs. We're not here to shame your love situation. Our only intention is to create audacious intimacy, seductive singlehoods, and healthy relationships. So I want you guys to join in with a spirit of we all have something important to say. We may not always agree, but the topic tonight can be a little triggering. The topic tonight can be a little moving, a little emotionally moving. And some people think that the topic tonight is like, it's nothing at all. But tonight we're going to be talking about unconditional love. And I have Jamie and Courtney here, who are my V Club mavens. And we are going to really delve into this topic of unconditional love. We started delving in it a little bit. And I was like, I had to put the kibosh. I was like, girls, it's getting too good. I want the audience to be able to hear what we're talking about. So if you want to join in and, I'm going to be asking some questions about unconditional love. I want to see what people think about it. I'll tell you, I just started advertising my workshop on Saturday, and I say something about men and women who crave unconditional love. And it's been very triggering for some people online. I mean, some people have responded back to me like, what are you even talking about? You can't love unconditionally. It doesn't exist. Some people don't even think it's a thing. Right? And I feel like it's a thing. We're going to delve into whether we feel like it's a thing, or we can come to some sort of consensus on what kind of thing it is or how to even generate it. So are you ladies ready to jump in? Is there anything that you already feel like you want to say? You feel moved to start it off?
I just want to say I never really thought too deeply about this as a topic, and I think it's really interesting that people are being triggered and having these strong opinions about it.
Oh, yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Like, I feel like it's one of those things where, and I think this happens a lot in like personal growth conversations or in conversations about love at all. It's one of those things where we have such a cynical culture, and unconditional love sometimes I think people see as either like pie in the sky, kind of Pollyanna, or they see it as, like some sort of religious thing where it's like, are you trying to, expect me to be like Jesus? Like, do you know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly.
And I think that's kind of where the triggering comes from. But I also think that all of that stuff is just surface stuff for like whatever's bubbling underneath around it. Mm-hmm. Right? Because a lot of times I think when we get cynical about something, it's because there's something we've experienced that said, cut off all of that, like, hearts and flowers, happiness stuff, because
it's going to hurt us.
Yeah, this is what the real world is like. You're going to get hurt, right?
So how do we define unconditional love?
Well, that's a great question. And that's what I want us to do. Like for each of us, like how do you define unconditional love? Because I have my way I define it. You have your way you define it, I would imagine, right?
Yeah, I think I have a few definitions.
You have a few definitions? Mm-hmm. All right. Well, who wants to throw out their definition first?
Jamie?
Go ahead, Jamie.
Well, I think, if you look at it from a spiritual standpoint, whatever your faith is, I don't subscribe to one religion, but I'm pretty new age. So I'm thinking, of course, like we're all connected and love is an energy, and of course I'm going to love my fellow human being. I'm going to love their soul, unconditionally, because I have a belief system that tells me that we're all here for a reason, and possibly, our souls made contracts with each other even before we entered our bodies, and, there's a reason why people are assholes sometimes. And it's all for learning and experience.
Yeah.
So at that level, I can say, sure, unconditional love, absolutely. But when we're talking about being on this planet and actually living day to day and moment to moment and having, experiences that are challenging with others, and maybe, we do get hurt, right? And so if we're hurt to an extent of being abused or harmed in a way that is hard to come back from, I think it's absolutely something to look a little closer at, like unconditional love. If that means to you loyalty of some kind or, tolerating somebody's bullshit, I wouldn't agree with that if that's the definition of unconditional love. But I think absolutely you can still love someone who hurt you. But I think if you love yourself, you can take yourself out of a situation that's harmful, do your healing work, and then maybe you can open up to this idea of unconditional love.
Yeah.
It's tricky though. And I think it is a matter of how you define it for yourself.
Yeah.
Also, if you think of love as something that is actionable, it's a verb.
Yeah.
Then that also changes the definition as well.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that was clear, but those are my thoughts on unconditional love.
I absolutely love your take on it. I totally, I agree with and see your take. And I also like to add to that too. I feel like, because I always say unconditional love for another person is when you admire someone's strengths, forgive their weaknesses, and support them through all of it, like their ups and downs, right? Like that's unconditional. And so, when we say that we're going to do that for someone, like for a lot of us, all of our past traumas come up, all of our other relationships that didn't work out, anything that we dealt with our parents, like all that stuff can come up around that kind of statement, because it's like, oh yeah, that's so easy to say, but is it so easy to do? Because I feel like what happens is, and the reason that I even started thinking about unconditional love is that I know so many long-term relationships, my parents included, like people that have just been together for decades that are still in resistance of their relationship, meaning that they're complaining about that other person constantly. So, of course we want to address when you're in a situation where it's just, flat out abuse and trauma. Like obviously there's a different sort of handling of what unconditional love is within that. But when we're talking about culturally, overall, generally, and relationships in our culture, just how they work, and especially the ones that have been together for decades, it's like, it's the same way that if you had like a job that you hated, it's that idea that I'm in this situation and I'm just going to continuously resist it rather than unconditionally love it and accept it for what it is and focus on what's good about it. That's what I feel like is like the crux of being able to have unconditional love with another person. It's like, I can accept that you don't do everything exactly like I want you to do it, or that you're not everything that's on my list, because I'm focusing on those things about you that are everything that I want, or that are, on my list of requirements, or that do match with my, my core values or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
For me, that's what it is between two people, right?
Mm-hmm.
What do you think, Courtney? What's your sort of like feeling about it?
I agree with you. I mean, to me, unconditional love is when you love someone irrespective of whether they love you back. It's essentially, it's a one-way street. And normally we're taught that love should be a two-way street. So that to me is unconditional love. And I love what you said, because realistically in a romantic relationship, probably on a practical level, it doesn't mean you forgive certain things, and maybe somebody is imperfect and you say, I still love you, even though you're imperfect. I think that being in a relationship with someone, in a romantic relationship with someone where it is completely a one-way street, where they just don't love you back, may not be a great idea. Now with parents, there's a lot of debate whether that's unconditional, whether love between family members is unconditional. And obviously sometimes those relationships can also get kind of, pesky.
That's interesting. I love that you brought up family, because I feel like there's this sort of, and maybe it's just my family, I don't know, but there's sort of this unwritten rule that family love is supposed to be unconditional, but it really isn't. Like, I feel like our families can sometimes be the most expectant of us, whether it's our parents or, our siblings, or even our extended family. It's almost as though, culturally, it's very easy for us to write each other off in that way. Like, if you're not who I want you to be, or if you're not fitting into what our traditional family mold may be, let's say you practice a different religion, or, I feel like a lot of, and you guys can tell me if it resonates or if you feel the same way. A lot of times the experience can be, because I think differently than you, or I live my life differently than you, then all of a sudden, you'll say you love me because we're family members, but I never hear from you. We don't spend time together. You know what I mean? Like, and I feel like a lot of people, because we're very much in an emotional killing off kind of culture where it's like, oh, if it's not working, then stop dealing with that person. That's why people get ghosted. That's why people stop talking to people, because it's easier to do that than to, have a clearing. I feel like a lot of family does that to each other. I don't know if you guys have any sort of similar experience, or know anybody that has had that more often than not.
That's interesting. So what I'm hearing is you're in your family, there's a bit of maybe excommunication. I don't know, maybe that's a strong word, or
definitely.
Okay.
I mean, I feel like my family, don't get me wrong, I feel like my family like if you were to ask us, it'd be like, oh, we love each other so much. But we were even joking the other day, because we're talking about possibly having a reunion. We're like, oh, can we get together not around the funeral? Because that's when we get together, is around funerals and things like that. But like our day to day, it's not like there's some sort of big familial, and I know there are families that do have a strong familial bond. I also know that there are families that are together all the time, but they're so dysfunctional that they drive each other crazy. So I give my family credit for not necessarily doing that.
Oh, Jesus.
But I feel like, very few families have found that sort of balance where it's like, the kids grow into adults. We find actual unconditional love where we can be friends with each other. Like, I can accept that you're my sibling that has this habit that I don't like so much, and I can still love you anyway, and we can still have an adult friendship. Or I can accept that, you're my parent that does, whatever you do a certain way, and that's okay. Like, I can be okay. It doesn't trigger me. I don't have to get resentful or go and talk about you to another family member or complain about it. You know what I'm saying? Like, yeah.
That's a tough one.
Yeah.
It's interesting. So I come from a family where being as part of each other's lives is almost like a religious experience. Even if you don't treat each other well, you sort of have to remain family, and you have to still have conversations and be very active in each other's lives.
Yeah.
So it sounds like it's the opposite of you, Candy, and that's also not a good thing, because sometimes it's just like it's just people who are not good influences in your life.
Yeah. Were you saying that it's like tied to your actual, like your family's religion, so that like it's part of like being religious?
No, we're not a religious family.
No,
it's like staying within the family, staying communicating with the family is a religious experience in itself. No, there's no actual religion involved.
Yeah, but like in a good way though? Yeah. Is it in a good, like?
Well, I think sometimes
it's a spiritual thing.
Well, no, that's what I mean. I'm making a joke out of it. Like, it's not a spiritual thing. It's almost like it's an obligation.
Yeah.
Like, it's
like taking communion.
Yeah.
We must sit down together and talk.
We must, exactly. So I think maybe that whole family topic, that's like its own can of worms.
It totally is.
Yeah.
It totally, but I think it feeds into, because I think how our family relationships develop are exactly how our love relationships develop as adults, right? I really do think that our parents, they always say we marry our parents, we date our parents. Our parent-child relationship is very much a model for how our relationships as adults happen. Mm-hmm. And also a lot of the things that happen to us in our childhood are around, being with our family, whether it's that, we got beat up by a cousin or something fantastic happened to us with a sister, or, you know what I mean? So I think that it definitely has its tie-in. And that's where unconditional love kind of begins and has an expectation that and it's not normally fulfilled. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean?
So maybe it's about, whether it's family or even romantic, maybe it's about saying, I love you, but I need to have boundaries around me. In that if you're hurting me, if you're doing something that's really negative and I can't get through to you and explain that I want things to be different, then maybe I have to distance myself. But in my heart, I still love you. Just stay away. Yeah. But really,
I think that what you're saying is reasonable. Like, it totally makes sense to me. And I don't want to discount it, because I definitely think there are situations where that is absolutely called for, where it's like, I have to protect myself, especially when you're dealing with a family member who just has some sort of like really just straight up toxic tendencies, whether it's drug addiction or, some sort of mental illness and they're not taking their medication that prevents them from actually showing up in a humane way. Yeah. But I think more often than not, people take that road when what's really called for is just a clearing and an understanding, like a getting present with each other, like about where we're coming from and why we're bumping heads or why it's not. And this is also a good topic around the holidays, because we're going to be with all our friends and loved ones and all of that stuff, right?
Yikes.
Yeah. Speaking of which, I see John and Julie and Tom and Steven came in. I see Tracy came in. Hi, everybody. So, I think it's bridging that gap between how unconditional love is expected in our family, but it's not really developed. And then we go into our romantic relationships and it becomes this sort of thing where we won't even allow it in there. So then we wonder why we struggle with our relationships.
Oh my God.
Yeah. Right? So I think that's our exploration. Like, how do we bridge that gap? And why do you think we struggle with achieving it? Like, because I feel like it's something that, like I said, there's the one hand where people just act like it's a pipe dream, right? Mm-hmm. And then there's the other hand where people feel like it's just too big, it's just too much. So like, I always think when something's like that, when they just don't even, think that it's in the world of possibility, the first thing to do is start to think, well, what would I have to do in order to even begin? Some people don't even want to have that conversation. So what would I have to do with myself in order to even begin to have unconditional love, where I don't immediately just go to boundaries and close myself off, right? I actually give it an opportunity to see what's possible, like what kind of conversations I can have. Like, I keep thinking of, like, with me and my sisters right now, we're taking care of our elderly parents. And for anybody out there who has siblings or even doesn't have siblings, when you're in a place of like trying to figure out what's going on with your elderly parents, if you can't get along with each other, it's stressful. Like, it's going to end up being a thing where you explode and explode and explode. And this is something that I think happens in families and happens in romantic relationships. It's as soon as something, we were talking, Jamie, because Jamie was talking about a couple she knows, they've been having a great time, and now all of a sudden they have a challenge because they have an unexpected baby. So as soon as something unexpected comes along, it's like, that's when you know that unconditional love is missing, when people completely break down and they can't get past, whatever that thing might be. So I'm just like, I've been in the thought process of how do you even begin the journey of unconditional love? What do you ladies think? Like, what are first steps?
Is it just ultimately acceptance?
It ultimately is, but I feel like
accept? Yeah. I mean, we can't even, we can't even accept ourselves, right? That we can talk about that. But totally. How do we accept someone else? Like as people, generally, we don't accept anything.
Yeah, I know, right?
Literally.
Like we're such a resist culture. Like protect myself, resist. But I think you hit the nail on the head. Like it is in the accepting of ourselves. Like and we talked about this a little bit beforehand, right? Like I feel like that resonates. The idea that, if I start, admiring my own strengths and forgiving my own weaknesses, even in little ways, like I'm starting myself on a path of being able to give that to somebody else.
Yeah. I think it can be as simple as the old metaphor of like filling up your cup so that you're spilling over, right? Because if we don't have anything spilling over, then that means we still have to work on ourselves to fill ourselves up. Yeah. So self-acceptance and self-love and really working on that, because it does. I mean, it sounds really corny. I'm tired of hearing the oxygen mask metaphor. But, I mean, it's true,
right?
It's so true.
It's one of those cliches that exists for a reason, right?
Yeah.
But even that, so then because I'm big on breaking things down into baby steps. So, right. So then that's the thing. It's like the self-love, the cliche of the putting your oxygen mask on first. It's like, how does that even begin? So if I'm in a love relationship, a romantic relationship, or if I'm in, a sibling relationship, whatever, and I want to get to a point where we have unconditional love. And so I've decided I'm going to start with myself and how I love and accept myself, like beginning steps.
I am lovable. I am confident. I am, I am enough. I am all those things, right? You just do that mental exercise. Yeah. That's obviously the hardest part.
It's like starting, you're saying like affirmations
and, therapy or whatever else, different programs, hypnosis, meditation. Mm-hmm. But I think once we get ourselves to a point where we're not like spilling over with like hatefulness or irritation, etc., then everything else has got to become a lot less annoying. Right. And by definition, we probably have a lot more unconditional something. Yeah. I don't even know if love, but I don't know. Compassion, yeah. Yeah. I mean, is unconditional love really possible? I don't know.
I believe that it is.
Is it?
I do. I believe that it really is possible. I believe that I think Jamie was saying about love being actionable, like that that it's a verb. I do believe that it is something that, because I think we're born being able to love unconditionally, but because we are in the culture that we're in, because I can't speak for, I can only speak for the culture I grew up in, right, as far as my perspective is concerned. But I think that in the culture that we're in, there is a story of gratification and enoughness that immediately starts to feed into our development, right? So I think that's what makes it feel like it's impossible, that it's not something that we can achieve. But my whole thing is always, with the early steps of self-love and getting to a point where you can allow unconditional love for yourself, is the willingness to release that there's anything wrong and that there's things that need to be fixed and that there's not enough of something. And so it's kind of a weird catch-22, because when you're not loving yourself, it's because you're holding on to these beliefs that there is something wrong, that's not good enough. Mm-hmm. And that's causing you to love yourself even less. And then it starts this cycle of, non-love. So I agree with you, Courtney. I do think that affirmation is one good way to sort of start retraining your brain. Mm-hmm. I also think it is realizing that there is resistance in place. Just being okay with the admission that I haven't been loving myself. Just if something's not working, if I'm having conflicts with people in my life, or if my romantic relationship is not working and I'm bumping heads with people, just that admission. It's almost like they say in AA, it's like admitting is the first step, right?
Oh, well, what they say, if you have any kind of, if there's anything that you don't like about yourself, like, for example, if you're shy and you feel like you go out in a public setting and you're just shy at a party, if you just say to yourself at a party, I'm shy, I'm just a shy person, it almost like it goes away. Because anytime something bothers us about ourselves, it's because we don't accept it. Yeah. Whatever we do accept about ourselves, it will stop bothering us, right? By definition, we accepted it.
Yeah.
So,
I actually, and if it's possible, I think even though it's sort of counterintuitive to shyness, I also think that what you're saying is right when we just share it with someone else. It's almost like if you have to give a speech and you're nervous and you let the people know you're nervous. It's like as soon as you share yourself, you diffuse it, right?
Well, the key is not complaining, though, right? We had in the podcast, a few podcasts ago, we talked about bitching and moaning. Right?
Yeah, if it's like, balance. This is stopping me, so look, I'm nervous, so I'm not going to give this speech now. That's one thing. Or I can't get over my nervousness as an identity. But like you're saying, like if I go into a social situation, and shyness is one of the things about me, and shyness might be a product of me not loving myself, it's the openness and the allowance of how can I just share myself in a small way and just say, this is what's happening with me now to whomever I'm talking to. Like the willingness to start to share ourselves. That is a big sort of avenue into like a journey of self-love, because automatically you get to have a connection with somebody where it's like they either get what you're going through or maybe they don't, but at least you get an opportunity to kind of be vulnerable.
Well, it's interesting what you just said, self-love, because we chatted about this right before this podcast, and this is when you shut it down.
I was like, we got to save it for the podcast.
So maybe true unconditional love can only be toward ourselves, or mandatorily has to be toward ourselves. And then hopefully toward others as well, but we definitely have to have it toward ourselves.
Yeah, I think you can't offer it to anybody else. It's like what Jamie was saying with the filling of the cup.
Yeah.
You definitely can't offer it to anybody else without giving it to yourself. But I think that it can't be that it's only towards yourself.
I don't know if that's possible, though. I think if you have unconditional love toward yourself, you probably will share it with everyone.
Exactly.
Else too.
Like I feel like it's the natural.
Yeah. Unless you're a narcissist. But then, but the thing is, they don't love themselves, right?
Right.
They actually love themselves. Yeah. So that's a different thing.
Yeah. I don't know. You guys, let's see. We got Brian, we got Roy, Stephen, and Tom. I think I said hi to Stephen and Tom before. You guys can chime in. I see that everybody's like coming in and quiet. Oh, and I love that. And I love the loves and the emojis. Somebody loves us. Somebody's angry. Somebody's laughing. I love it. Hi. And William just joined us. So, do you ladies want to talk about, and are you willing to talk about, because this question can get kind of personal, do you feel like you have ever experienced unconditional love or expressed it?
I think so. Yeah. I think that I was with someone for a long time. We were married, and he remains a really, really, really close friend. And I think that I have unconditional love toward that person. Yeah. It's not romantic in any way. It's just, if you believe in past lives, I think this is probably a person that has been around me for a long time. I just love him as a human being. Yeah. And it's quite unconditional. I feel like anything he could do or would do, I probably would still love him. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. But I may not want him in my life if he did something horrible. This is where the boundary comes in.
And I love that you said that, though, because I think another thing that was triggering for a lot of people that reached out is they feel like because you love someone or you say you love someone unconditionally, that means that you hold on to them. And like Jamie mentioned earlier about putting up with their bullshit, or that you let them wreak havoc in your life, or you be in an unworkable relationship with them. I mean, it's another sort of like paradox, because I do feel like on some level, unconditional love does offer the support of longevity with someone. I think that ultimately you can create that. However, if you guys aren't on the same level or seeing things the same way and it ends up not working out, I do think it's possible to separate from somebody, like Courtney said, and have unconditional love for them, like still love them in that way. So that pressure that some people were feeling, there was a woman who reached out to me who was just like, it was very dangerous for me to feel like I loved unconditionally and I was with an abuser and, all of that. Like, here's the thing, you can love your abuser and know that you can't be in the same space as your abuser and, still wish that person well and not hold on to resentments about them, fill yourself up and allow the love to flow without needing to hold on to them. And love is not attachment. And I think a lot of people confuse love with attachment. Attachment is a whole other thing. Yeah.
Yes. That's right? Well, I think that's why using the word unconditional love in romantic relationships, I think is a little confusing, because I think in romantic relationships, it is about attachment and it is about treating each other well enough. I'm not saying your partner has to do everything perfectly. That's not possible, but they should absolutely satisfy your list of things that are mandatory. And, you should obviously choose your battles, pick your battles. But I think that's a very dangerous thing in relationships, because at some point, I do think relationships may have their expiration. And at some point, they may turn abusive or anything else can happen. And I think we should absolutely be able to leave our romantic relationship at the right time, and we shouldn't feel like we're stuck in it. I mean, I think all of us in the world have had relationships where we've gotten stuck and stayed there too long. And maybe at some point it did feel unconditional or some sort of codependent. I don't know. I think unconditional, it makes me very nervous when
I got you. But also what I'm hearing in what you're saying is that, and here's my thinking on it. I feel like because we do have this sort of group of standards or a list of things that we want that person to fulfill, I think that's why relationships don't last. And I think that's why when we're in a situation of not believing in unconditional love, because that's conditional love. Like, I will love you if you meet this certain way, or if you behave this way, or if you're, meeting up to what I believe my standards are. And that's how I think most people approach relationships, which is why most of them don't work out. Like, I actually see it from the opposite end of the spectrum.
Interesting. Well, okay. Do you think there is a minimum list of requirements?
No.
Okay.
Here's the thing I believe in, and maybe it's why I'm single, but what I believe in very strongly as far as relationships are concerned is that it's not that a relationship can't work if you have a list of standards, but I think that's where we run into difficulty and resistance, is by having an expectation that a person meet whatever the expectation of the standards are, rather than just focus on being exactly who we want to. So if I'm showing up in a relationship as who I want to be and who I want to be with, then it's like what we were talking about earlier about. We were talking earlier about vibration. Like, how do you vibrate on a level, and then what you want to attract is someone who's vibrating on the same level that you're at, or what you do attract is someone who's vibrating on your level. So if you're vibrating on a low level, you attract somebody who's vibrating on a low level, and vice versa, right? So I think the way in which to do that is, if I'm being who I want, then I attract someone who's vibrating on that level, rather than trying to manipulate the external, which is have someone meet the expectations, which I think that's the dangerous thing that we all get into, and why our relationships don't last. I mean, I definitely have done that with people, and then the relationship, broke down. And as soon as it's over, we always say the same thing. It's either, now I know who that person is. I thought they were somebody different than who they were, or I'm really heartbroken, or I'm really disappointed. We feel a sense of loss because we had an expectation that this person meet something and they didn't or couldn't, because they never will be able to. Like, even the most minimal of expectations, no one can meet them all the time,
sure.
Right? And also being attached to having them meet them is a slippery slope, because let's say, just because it's easy, let's say we have an expectation that someone make a certain amount of money, right? And if we're attached to, I have to be with someone who has the capacity to make this much money, and then all of a sudden they're not making that much money, like, that's, the opposite of unconditional love. And then the relationship blows up, right?
Absolutely. Okay, yeah. But what if you're in a relationship, and this obviously happens very often. We get people coming to the V Club with this problem. Let's say they stop having sex. And there's, let's say the husband is abusive, or he's cheating, or just something happens and there's this divide.
Yeah.
And let's say they go to therapy, they go through a lot of different avenues, and they just cannot get the romantic part to work.
Yeah. And I love that question, because I think what happens often, especially like even when I deal with my clients, people always come with all the problems that their partner has, right? You guys know, your coaches, it's like people always come with the list of problems or the list of things that their partner is not doing and what they're not offering. And my advice always is to go inward right away. Because going inward right away with, first of all, like I said, we attract who we are. We attract where we're vibrating at. And going inward right away gives you access to showing up in a way that if that person really is like at this base level that a lot of times we put a person at when the relationship is not working out, and you start vibrating higher, they're gonna either drift off or be inspired by your vibration and move up that vibration. But usually when someone's in that state and they're saying all those things, it's because they've been, and they're usually overwhelmed and they're tired of it and they're sick of it. They're ready to break up the relationship or whatever, because they've been trying to get that person to turn that behavior around, which is a resistance. It's a resistance of ourselves, and it's a resistance of what is so about that person, and it sounds so counterintuitive, and a lot of things will tell you, oh, if, this relationship is toxic if the person stops having sex with you, or the relationship should be over. But really, in essence, it's like, as soon as I get to a point where I'm looking at you with lack, I'm looking at me with lack. And so it's the lack mindset that needs to be turned around. And if it's something that, the reason that we're not having sex is something that is vibrationally unfixable, the only way that I can make a difference or transform it for myself is to change myself, because I can't change you. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's what I think.
We say that at the B Club for sure. Like, you can only change yourself.
Right?
Yeah, I do think it's a vibrational issue there. I was curious, Courtney, when you were saying like requirements, what kinds of requirements were you thinking of?
Well, I think
not a serial killer.
Not the serial killer.
Requirements that you're not a serial killer.
Right. No Dirty Johns. You guys watch that series. It's good.
Yeah, I mean, requirements can be around financial stability. Requirements can be around, and probably, I'm afraid to say it now, probably should be.
I don't think you're wrong for feeling that way, because a lot of people do feel that like that. And I used to teach that too, like come up with your list.
Yeah.
But go ahead, say what your requirements.
So I think financial requirements could be one for people. I think that sex drive requirements could be another one. Mismatched sex drives obviously are very difficult for couples. Requirements could be around, do you want to have a family or not? How big is your family? How do you like to spend your time? Do we have something in common? Like, do you like to travel? If one person loves to travel, the other person just wants to sit home and watch TV. Yeah, that's a incompatibility. So I mean, there could be some very basic list, but but beyond that, I think we should be flexible. Yeah. I mean, I think it's hard not to have a basic list, right? We obviously do have, as people, we do have our preferences, we do have our personalities. Yeah, and it's not, but I completely agree with you. We vibrate on a certain level, so hopefully we will be attracting a person that matches those very basic criteria on the list. Yeah. So,
and also, I mean, if we do have certain things that are important to us when we're engaged in them, it's like, if I'm someone who believes in physical activity and that's what I'm doing, I'm going to be around other people who are engaged in physical activity, right? So I think that in essence, you're right about what's important about compatibility, but it's when we think that we can somehow manipulate and control someone else's compatibility with us. Like, when we think that we can set certain standards and say, if they meet these, then it's going to be a good relationship. I think that's the slippery slope.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. We have to take people as they are.
Yeah. And also just be, that's why I say, like, be who you want to be with, because when you're engaged in who you are and what you love and what's important to you, then you're going to be like, let's say you're a doctor without borders. You know what I mean? You're going to meet people who are doctors without borders, or you want to build, habitats for humanity. That's who you're going to meet. That's who you're going to be around. You're going to be, vibrating in your truth and authentically who you are. So you don't have to be in a space of like, well, you have to be this, this, and this. Because then that means that you're trying to and it's here's the thing about it. It's impossible, because people are so good at representing themselves a certain way, to know for sure that someone's going to be able to meet all your criteria, right? Yeah. So we get ourselves, and I think that's what can be frustrating sometimes about dating, and especially online dating, is that we think that we're going to be able to recognize someone who has all that compatibility because on the outside they have those things. Let's say, they're fit or they're financially free or whatever. But in the long run, when it comes to getting to know each other and actually connecting intimately, I mean, we all know from experience, someone can seem so good on paper, and seem to have all of the things because we have no control over our, you know, finding that compatibility. The only thing we can control is being compatible with ourselves and attracting it, right?
Yeah. But then there's also the issue of, or the question of, you know, when you're in a relationship for a long time, and obviously, you know, we constantly change, right? And hopefully we change together with our partner, and sometimes we don't. Yeah. And I think that's where the question of unconditional love comes in. You're together for 10 years, 20 years, 30 years. And then you've probably grown apart a little bit. I think most people do. Yeah. At which point do you say, I'm no longer happy with you? Yeah. And I want to leave, or it's unconditional love and I'm just going to stick it out no matter what. I think that's really where it's not at the beginning of dating. Like if you have unconditional love for someone you just met, come talk to Candace. Maybe you need coaching. So,
but then if you're in a long-term thing, it's like if I'm in a space of you don't have what I want, or you're not doing what I want, like what am I focusing on? So if I start focusing on what is working about the relationship, we might come to some sort of agreement that we need to complete the relationship, right? But I think part of the issue, and I have a couple that I know where one of them kind of drinks heavily. So, you know, part of the issue is that, you know, she really doesn't want him to drink, and for obvious, valid reasons, right? It's not abusive or anything like that. It's just, you know, she just doesn't want that for him. So in the resisting it, you know, what it does is it draws a wedge. So then, you know, it becomes a cycle where he wants to do it more because he feels inadequate, or he feels like he's not doing the right things for her. And, you know, she feels away, and then he feels away. And then, you know, when we focus on what's lacking, then that causes the breakdown of the relationship. Yeah. And there'd be times, I think, especially in a long-term relationship, where someone falls short of certain things, but it's in the focusing on them falling short. I feel like we cut off unconditional love. When we focus on what is working, we can actually grow that, as opposed to, I feel like it's like lack mindset, right?
But can you completely ignore certain things that bother you? For example, your partner can be cheating, or they could be drinking too much. I mean, there could be a lot of bad things that they could be doing. Yeah. And sometimes you can't ignore them.
I think that if there's a pattern of straight up toxic behavior that's like, you know, clinical, abusive, you know, obviously there's deal breakers. No one should just sit in, you know, injury, right? But I think, for the most part, generally speaking, in relationships, when it does get to be in longevity, like I mentioned my parents earlier, for the most part, what it really is just a dissatisfaction with that other person. Yeah. And I think the things like drinking more and cheating and all of that stuff, which both men and women do, they grow bigger out of the small things having been, you know, if we treat the small things like we have so much dissatisfaction with it, we start to grow them into bigger and bigger things, you know. And a lot of times I think people cheat, both men and women, because they feel a dissatisfaction. Yeah. And rather than refocus onto a satisfaction, they choose to do something that causes even more dissatisfaction in the relationship. Right? Yeah. It's a hard, like, I'm not saying this like, it's hard. You know, it's a hard thing to wrap our minds around, because I think that we are so taught in this culture to just hurry up and fix it and make it better, you know, rather than actually see where we can start slowly transforming things by focusing on what does work. We're so quick to focus on what doesn't work, and so quick to resist, to say no to things as soon as something doesn't quite look right or doesn't fit into our beliefs or our context. I mean, obviously, like, you know, I said earlier, there can be extremes. If someone's beating you or is like straight up, you know, bringing toxic, unfixable clinical energy into a relationship, like they're not even available to be in a relationship. So obviously that's a time when you have to separate yourself. But if we're honest, for the most part, we all, you know, especially those of us who have been in a long-term relationship, you start out in one place and then it grows in one direction or another, right? Yeah.
And everyone does shitty things, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And the things get shittier the more we focus on the shitty things. So it's like, you know, I guess that's where we're sort of saying unconditional love comes in. It's like, if it's something that we're willing to open ourselves to allow to place in, rather than going to the space of, you're not what I want you to be, and so I cannot love you the same way, or I cannot love myself the same way. I can't enjoy this relationship. I can't be who I want to be. Rather than doing that, which is what most of us do, we might have a completely different experience in how our relationships work out.
So true.
Right?
I wish the term was not unconditional love. I wish it was unconditional acceptance.
It could be that too.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah.
But that's
I feel like that's kind of synonymous.
Yeah.
Right?
Because to me, love is like, unconditional love just sounds like you have to stick it out.
Yeah.
Under all circumstances. And like, you know, it's almost
you're like, I don't like it.
Well, you know, because I do think that there must be, I'm sure there are people out there that have stuck it out in abusive situations and in situations where they're not comfortable. And that scares me.
Yeah. But even that phrase, like, if I'm considering myself sticking it out, I'm not in a space of unconditional love. What I'm in is a space of attachment. So I'm sticking, even the term itself, like I'm sticking it out. It's like, I'm just going to do this work. And unconditional love is like, I'm finding the ease. Like I'm going to stop looking for what's not working. I'm going to stop looking for the difficulty and look for the ease.
Oh, I love that. Oh my God. I feel like that's an affirmation. Like, basically make that into a phrase. Yeah.
Right. It's a tweetable. We should tweet it out.
Yeah.
Look for the ease.
Yeah.
You know, the path of least resistance, you know, what we oftentimes in relationships. And I think it's because we are taught to have someone meet our standards is that we resist. Okay, you're not doing what I want you to do. You're not showing. And trust me, I'm the queen of it. My ex will tell you it might have been a daily nagging session. Like, you know, you're not doing this. You smoke too much weed. You didn't come home on time. You know, you didn't call me when you said you were going to call. Whatever it is, like, you know, that's what we tend to do to each other in relationships rather than find the ease. Like I could sit and I could, you know, turn the fact that you came home an hour or two late, that you're cheating on me, and become a thing and like let it froth up and bubble up and we can have a fight about it and turn it into that very easily until that becomes what's true and what's so, right? Or what I could do is just find the ease. Like, why am I in a space of making up a story around this person? Why do I make it mean that because they're doing something I don't like, that it has anything to do with me at all, or that it's against me? Or why do I have this need that this person fulfill all of these things when I can fulfill them myself?
So what I'm hearing you say is that unconditional love toward yourself, that's essentially would eliminate all that, right? Because you're really talking about unconditional love toward yourself.
Totally, it's about unconditional.
So it's really self-love.
And then that's where the overflow comes in. Right. Because if I'm loving myself and providing for myself, and this is not to say that a relationship there isn't provision in a relationship, but it's the expectation of provision. We go into relationships with such expectation that something's supposed to be given to us, when really the whole purpose of a relationship is that two people arrive with what I can give you. Like, my intention should be all about, like, I'm here to overflow. I can't overflow unless I'm full. Like you were saying, the cup is full, right? Like, it's just so counterintuitive to enter into a relationship with, you got to be this, you got to be that, you got to be this, because that's all, like, you got to give to me. You got to, otherwise I'm not going to be okay. It's not going to be okay. If mama ain't happy, nobody's going to be happy. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and the more needy we are, the harder it is to be in a relationship. Yeah. Not to mention to attract a partner.
Right?
Right, because that's just what happens.
Totally.
Yeah, people can almost like smell neediness on you, on the person, right? Yeah.
And some people who are like, if they already have codependent attachment, they love that neediness. And so then you end up in this cycle of a relationship where it's like you're constantly trying to please each other. Nobody's getting pleased because everybody's in complaint mode. Right. Because they're busy trying to get, you to fill them up. And we think that our partner's supposed to complete us and fill us up and all of that stuff. Right? What were you going to say, James?
I was going to say, like, yes, absolutely. We have to love ourselves and treat ourselves with kindness and compassion first. However, in addition to that, when you're in a relationship with somebody, you need to be given those positive strokes. I don't know what the statistic is or the number, whatever, but there's got to be so many more positive strokes than negative strokes. Because one negative stroke can, like, put you down, down here, can knock you down far. But I'm saying, like, both people in a relationship are responsible for filling that emotional bank account between each other, and it's a joint account in a relationship. And it does matter. All the little bitty micro expressions and interactions matter. Yeah. I wish I could remember more of a talk I heard from John Gottman from the Gottman Institute. I really like their whole take on relationships and how you treat one another. But it really is like, even if somebody makes a comment that's like inconsequential, you know, they're like, oh, look, it's a nice day outside, and your partner doesn't have a reaction to that, that goes into the negative bank account, right?
Yeah. Like, so you didn't acknowledge them.
You didn't acknowledge at all. Because chances are the next time that person isn't going to share their observation of the weather. They're going to keep it to themselves. And then this divide starts happening, and it can be so insidious. And that's how, like, people miss that there's a distance growing between two people, right? And I mean, it's all good. It's all good stuff to really keep learning. You know, I think it's important that we remind ourselves about how we treat one another and how big those little tiny moments actually are. Yeah. Because they add up very quickly, right?
I think you're right. I also think too, it's like what you're talking about is when you're the one contributing, right? When you're the one doing the filling, or you know, however you want to be showing up. I also think that with a practice of that in a relationship, it becomes less, you know, because you get more and more intimately connected when you're present enough with each other that you are taking care of the other person in that way. I don't think that you can get yourself in a space of being worried too much about it. Like, because then you don't know what you might say that might trigger that person. So you don't want to be in that space.
Like walking on eggshells.
Yeah.
No, you don't want to walk on eggshells.
But I do think you're right in that you lead with compassion because you're already offering enough compassion to yourself that you can be compassionate and that you're not looking for where your feelings can be hurt either. Do you know what I mean? Right. And I think sometimes we do that. Like, it's like that because that person didn't say that thing, then my feelings are now hurt, and I'm, you know, and I think the way to sort of not go down that road and to start having a practice is to also be cognizant of not being so easily tipped over.
Sure.
Or, you know what I mean? Or so quick to put things in your negative bank.
Sure, right? Sure. I think it's something to be aware of, though.
Yeah.
Because it can be something that maybe you don't realize you're internalizing.
Yeah.
Like, if your partner doesn't respond to you in these little tiny moments, like, you could just brush it off, right? But then a year later, you could be miserable and you could wonder, like, where did this come from?
Yeah.
And then you could start blaming yourself. You know, it's this whole spiral thing. But that all said, hi, Lee.
Hey, Lee. Lee's here. And Jonathan and Joe and Donna. Go ahead.
Yeah. I don't know. I kind of lost my train of thought. But yeah, I just think that learning about relationships and learning about how you treat, number one, yourself. Yeah. Number two, your primary in your relationship, right? So I think, you know, you can't really take this stuff for granted. Yeah. Because we were talking about earlier, in our childhood, we are noticing, we're absorbing everything, and we're just replicating basically what we're shown. Yeah. And it's not necessarily somebody sitting you down and saying, like, don't trust a man, you know, or anything like that. It's these messages we pick up subliminally and through observation. And so these are so deep-seated. We were talking about brain stuff earlier, and subconscious, and how deep these neural pathways can become. And you have to kind of wake up to some of these beliefs that you have. But anyway, I'm going on a tangent. To bring it back, it's that, you know, it's easy to just kind of like Forrest Gump your way into relationships and not really be conscious, right, about how everything's going. And then you can kind of like one day realize, oh, this isn't going so well, you know, and it's hard to pinpoint. And I'm bringing this up because I think I wish that somebody would have taught me, or I would have taken the reins and learned and done some research on just basic, you know, communication in relationships and things like this. So this is, but I think
the point that you're bringing up that's really good, though, is that desire to actually just take care of your partner emotionally. Like it's okay to be present to taking care of your partner emotionally.
Yes. And even when you said that, though, I kind of panicked because, because, you know, that taking care of someone else, not really our responsibility, right? And in a lot of ways, that can get very toxic and dysfunctional and
or maybe take care with your partner, not of your partner, but with your partner. So what I'm hearing, what you're saying from the Gottman Institute, is that it's about understanding that something you say can be a trigger, something that you do can be a trigger, and if it's not, if you're not aware of it, and it can go on, it can sort of grow into a resentment, right?
Yeah,
grow into a long-standing thing. So, I mean, what I'm getting from what you're saying, you can tell me if I'm wrong, is that the idea is that when you show up to contribute, that you're there to be compassionate, that you're there to take care with that person. So
that sounds like unconditional acceptance and love, right?
Yeah, but that also, you're in doing that, you develop a practice of, if both of you are doing that, then after a while you understand each other in such a way that it's not something you have to be cognizant of.
Because you built this foundation of being with each other, right? And I think that is crucial maybe some people are naturals at this, and it does, I think, more naturally come out if you're used to taking care of yourself and loving yourself and giving to yourself and all of that. However, a side note, I was just talking to my mom the other day about one of my nephews who's having trouble getting into a long-term relationship. He's 30 years old. I was an N when I was 8 years old. So anyway, he's having a little trouble, and my mom was considering the fact that, he's a bachelor, and like maybe he doesn't know how to really be with somebody else, because when you get used to being by yourself, right, it's like, oh yeah, you have to start thinking about what might bother another person and things like this. But anyway, I'm going off on all these tangents, but I think coming back to
we got 1 minute left for the audio people. Go ahead. Coming back to
know yourself, love yourself. That's it. Period.
All right, Jimmy. So for the audio people, we're gonna say, never forget that you're a love machine. If you ever feel like you're not getting enough, you just need to make more because you're a love machine. And then ask for Candy. Audio people, thank you for being with us. Armed Radio Global, we love you very much. Facebook Live people, I'm going to give you a little information about the workshop on Saturday. Bye.